All right, more about context. Yesterday we talked about context, and today let's talk a little bit more about what exactly context is and what it means to people and how we communicate. Then go ahead and give you 5 ways to use context to just have more effective reporting and to be more effective with data altogether. Let's talk about the brain. So, whenever we see something, taste something, have an emotional response to something, our brain immediately contextualizes whatever that experience is as stored context. So, anything else that we have, if something scared us, then forevermore we're scared of whatever that thing is. If some food was good, then if we hear chicken, we might think, ooh, that sounds tasty. Or if we hear broccoli, we might think, oh, gross. Or if we think about a beautiful sunset over the mountains that we saw before. And if we think about things that are sensory that everyone has in common, everyone has some context in terms of emotions, which is why emojis work so well and why emojis are so popular. In a strange sense, an emoji is almost like a miniature report using a little face symbol to represent an emotion, basically some stored context in our brains. Even animals respond to context. If they've heard a command before or seen a gesture before and it worked out well for them and they get a treat or praise, then based off of their context, we know what we want them to do, they hear the command, and we get instant results. So step number 1 out of the 5 steps for how to be more effective with your data comes down to know what the end result of your reporting might be or what you're using the data for. Have a goal. So maybe you want funding, and maybe you need to create a report to make sure that you get funding. Well, funding for what? You need a grant. What's that grant for? Downtown economic development? Be specific. The more specific the goal of what you're trying to report on, the more likely you are to get exactly what you're trying to get out of your data. Next, this may seem obvious, but look at your data. Take a good look at the data that's present and consider, does this data fully support what I'm trying to do for, say, back to the example of obtaining a grant? Okay, so maybe we need to know we need X amount of money. So maybe we need $5 million. Okay, but is that enough? So now we need to consider, okay, so I need $5 million to basically do this economic or downtown development, but is there enough data for anyone to care? Do we need to get into more details such as how big will the building be? Why $5 million? What types of materials are going to go into building this building? What type of building? Is it a skyscraper? Is it a floor plan? What's the footprint of, who knows? Go down the list, but is there enough data? And so that actually goes into number 3 is, after we've looked at the data, do we need more data? Sit and think long and hard about that. And like I said, it sounds obvious, but you would be surprised at some of the things you can come up with if you can figure out how you can apply more context by either doing correlation or pivots. And we can talk about pivots and correlation in another talk, but we're talking about applying more context to get what you want. Now, the 4th step to being more effective with your data is tell a story. If you can tell a story, like once upon a time, well, okay, so maybe we don't need to start talking about once upon a time stories, but you can start talking about, okay, so we need $5 million to build this mall that's going to have these types of outlets, and it's going to be built out of rocks and sticks with televisions all along the walls so that when people walk into this mall, they see something that looks unique and different and has cobblestone floors and ceilings with a log exterior to remind someone of the mountains. I have no idea. Like, this is not a talk about how to make your report look good, but present something sensory rather than just throwing something that someone can close their eyes and sort of almost envision the mall that you're requesting funding for, why you need the funding for that grant. So the more context you can provide, let's go all the way back to context that we've built over our lives. People have seen malls before. People have seen sunrises before. People have purchased phones. Think about a way to connect to the viewer and connect to them on a level beyond the data, something sensory. Apply that context to the rest of your report. If you struggle with trying to figure out how in the world can you turn a hideous report about statistics and analytics into some sort of story that's a little more comprehensible by the person who you're presenting to, consider going back to step number 1. You have an end goal. What exactly are you hoping to get out of the report? Start the whole process over again, because you can't tell a story if you don't know how the story is supposed to end. Know where the story is supposed to begin, know where it's supposed to end. Obviously, the story begins with you trying to get something, but it ends with what that should look like and, you know, what you expect out of the report. Very, very important. So then go back through step number 2 and look at the data again and consider maybe you don't have enough data to tell a proper story or have something that's intriguing. That goes back to something I said yesterday, is you can use reports to get a raise. Why should you get a raise? You can't just be like, I want some money. Why should you get a grant? You can't just be like, hey, I need $5 million to build this mall. Where is the mall even going to be? Okay, now let's consider the next step, which is making sure that you take a look at that presentation again, and does it tell a comprehensive story? And then finally we come to step number 5, which is present your data. Present your report in whatever form it may be. Maybe it's not a report, maybe you're doing a presentation or a pitch to tell people that they should buy something or something along those lines. But if you can apply context to what you're doing, once again, I'm not getting into the aesthetics of things, but you will have drastically more effective use of representing your data. It's beneficial for getting customers to be more interested in purchasing what you're doing. Tell them a story. If you want to get anything out of your data, just saying, I want this or I want that, add something that says, well, this is what I want, but this is what the end result should look like, and paint a picture for people, and maybe even see if you can represent it and spin it in a way of like, this is something that you probably want as well. Make it enticing. How can you make something boring exciting or enticing? It's apply context, apply something sensory, something you can talk about, I don't know, food, colors, daylight, the weather, or if it's something like cybersecurity, you can talk about safety and privacy. Go down the list, but consider adding context to what you're doing, and you'll see how you might come up with something better than you've ever done before. So going back over these 5 steps, you want to make sure that you set a goal with clear results in mind, look at the data, consider supporting data, build a story, and present that story. What you don't have context for is, why was I wearing headphones? That's a very good question. Just why? So if you like the video, give me a like, and if you're interested, go ahead and subscribe. This guy thinks you should do both. I'll see you next time.